I got a little bit older, I started refinishing furniture.
Okay.
I did a chest of drawers one time. Went down to an antique store and bought I was about 16, and I bought a chest of drawers.
Yeah.
And it was kind of beat up. The drawers were falling off and all that stuff. Hauled it home. Of course, I still lived at home at the time, and rebuilt it, put it back up, got it all back together, refinished it and all that. You know,
Okay.
it was one of those old-fashioned type. It had the real fancy mirror
Right.
and all that.
So-
Turned out really nice.
Rebuild. So,
Well, I had to. I mean, it was broken. I bought it at an antique store that was, the drawers were falling apart on it, and so I knew I had to rebuild it. That was why.
yeah.
It's part of the fun of doing it, and then refinished it, and it turned out really nice. And I was living home at the time, so my mother kind of took over, put it
Okay.
in one of her rooms, and I never got it back. So she had it for years, but that's okay. And then I built things for the family.
Okay.
And then, of course, I had rudimentary tools back then. I couldn't afford anything, so I built stuff out of just whatever I could afford. Skill saw, was a big deal back then.
Right. Right.
So I had to get clever. I remember one time, one of our first houses that my wife and I had, I built a set of bookcases that were next to our picture window, and they had to have a arch. I built arches on them.
Okay.
So not knowing anything about how to bend wood or any of that, I ended up cutting them with a jigsaw, and then gluing them together all in segments.
Okay.
And it lasted for years, and we lived there for like 20 some years, and when we left, it was still there. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I like to make things that work and do things.
Okay.
Doors open up, things happen. I don't make like inanimate type objects. Like I built jewelry boxes for my granddaughters,
Okay.
which was a real challenge, and they turned out beautiful. They were music boxes. I had to buy the music work that goes inside and figure out how open the lid, it would come on and all that. And I lined them in felt and all that. They were beautiful. They turned out really nice. But man, the hours that you spend on that,
Yeah.
I could build a house, which I've done, by the way. So
So a little bit of carpentry, a little
oh
bit
yeah,
of...
a lot of carpentry. No, I
Yeah.
built probably 5 different homes over the years for investment. That worked out pretty good. And so I did my own cabinetry, my own finish work, doors, windows, all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I just enjoy building in general. I have to be building something all the time, or I'm not happy. I just got to be. I'll create a project if I have to.
Right.
So my profession, I was a commercial construction superintendent.
Okay.
And I did that for 40 years, I guess.
Okay.
Started out in carpentry. One of the first projects I ever did was, we lived in California at the time. I was born and raised in Southern California, and
Okay.
I moved from California about 20 years ago. Don't regret it. I had an opportunity to go to work for a company that was headquartered in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Okay.
So I left my young family back in California, and I went myself back to Knoxville, Tennessee. So I had a good opportunity for this company, and I worked as a carpenter on a parking structure. The first thing I ever did was on a parking structure, but I already had some carpentry skills, so I pretty well knew how to cut in stairs and do all that kind of stuff. So I did that, and then I stayed with that company for quite a while, for about 5 years, and moved all over the country. I built in North Carolina, Tennessee, Texas. We came to Texas before I lived here, and down in San Marcos, built a large distribution company for the Kroger company. Kroger Foods. You asked me what my experiences. It was in supervision, construction,
Right.
large projects.
Okay.
The last project I did was in Dallas about 2.5 years ago when I retired. It was the
Okay.
last project I did. It was in South Dallas, and it was a distribution center again for Kroger Foods.
Yeah.
Not the same company, it was a different company. Kind of give you the size of it, it was around $180 million project, so it was a massive project. So,
Yeah.
I would have 200 to 300 people a day on the job,
Okay.
to manage. So that was my profession, and I enjoyed it. When you run a project of that magnitude, it's different,
Yeah.
Matter of fact, there's been several times where I would come home in my earlier days, and I would still be in my superintendent mode, and I'd be hollering at the kids or whatever,
Right.
and my wife would have to grab me by the ear and say, "Hey, you're not on the job anymore,
Right.
Mister.
Yeah,
You don't run things around here."
You're not Mr. Manager.
Yeah, you're not
Mr.
in
Dad.
charge around here. So she set me straight pretty much. But all along during that time, whenever I could build something,
Right.
when I wasn't traveling.
Yeah.
We've been in this place now for almost 15 years, and,
Yeah.
and like I said, the shop has progressed over the years.
You
Added
find
stuff
it
to
like a sanctuary to come out here.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And my wife is just wonderful because she's fine with that. I can stay out here all day long.
Right.
Matter of fact, I got an old refrigerator over there and put food and stuff. I got a coffee pot and all that kind of stuff. And I had a microwave on one of my projects that I brought home, and I got a microwave in here. And my wife bought me something. One of my buddies came over one time and he said, "Dude, don't you get it? She's trying to move you out of the house." Yeah, I could live out here.
Right.
Well, one of the things that I was real proud of doing is when I taught myself how to do epoxy work.
Okay.
So I have a son who lives in North Carolina, and his lot is about 10 acres, and it's just filled with hardwood. I mean, he's got maple and cherry wood and walnut and oak, all kinds of wood. When he moved into the house, he wasn't a woodworker, so he didn't even know what he had.
Right.
Me and my wife went to North Carolina and visited him, and I kind of educated him on the wood that he had out there that was fallen.
Yeah.
Trees that had fallen for years, didn't have to cut any of them down. And I hired a guy back there to mill some of the wood for me and brought it back to Texas here, which I still have some in the back here. So to ask me what I was most proud of was milling that wood, and I made tables. What do you call burl wood tables?
Okay.
Some pretty large ones, and learned how to finish them and epoxy them and make tables. And I sold several of them. They're all gone now.
Okay.
But they turned out just beautiful. I think I do. One of the things I do best, I think, is epoxy work.
Okay.
It's taken a lot of time practice to get it where it's perfect. There's no bubbles, there's no bugs,
Right,
there's nothing.
right. So whose idea was it? Who invited who to say, "Hey, let's do a club"?
I'm trying to remember. I believe it might have been Kevin or maybe Jerry. I'm not sure. I recently put it on an email. It could have been a Facebook thing, because at that time I was on Facebook for a little while.
Okay.
And the question was, anybody interested in forming a group? And I thought, yeah, that sounds good. I'd like to get together with a group of guys that share the same interests.
Sure.
And we could trade ideas, help each other with different expertise.
Yeah.
Which has worked out well, because I've had a couple of guys come over here.
Right.
I helped them with some stuff, and vice versa. So it was Kevin and Jerry and myself, Don Knutson and Walt Patton,
Okay.
and then Thomas McCarthy. And I can't remember if there's anybody else off the top of my head. But anyway, we all met for the first time a couple of years ago in a church over in Mansfield. It was a church there, and it wasn't a church function. It just happened to be they let us have that space for an evening, and we just went in there and just talked about doing this. I have in the construction industry. I've mentored a lot of young guys that's in the construction industry. Taught them field management and things like that in construction.
Right.
But not necessarily in woodworking. I haven't had a continuous student or anything.
Sure.
But like I said, I've had people come over before, and I've helped them with their projects. So yeah, I'm most interested in and we all were. We talked about originally about helping out the young people coming up, high school kids.
Yeah.
People like that are good kids, but they want to learn, and maybe they don't have the opportunity. Their fathers aren't woodworkers, or my dad, for example, was an industrialist. He wasn't a woodworker, and so I got his mechanical table. But what I learned on my own. I didn't have a mentor or anybody taught me. I was self-taught. I remember when I was training to be a superintendent, took a good 4 or 5 years before I got my own project. And when I got my own project, the guy that mentored me told me, he said, "You have a responsibility in the industry to teach somebody else."
Yeah.
And I did.
Pay it down the line.
I paid it down the line several times.
Right.
I took guys that were just carpenters, but I could see a potential in them, like myself. brought them up. They end up being fantastic project managers or superintendents or whatever.
Right.
And every once in a while, I still hear from one once in a while that, hey, Mitch, I'm over here doing a project in, Tennessee, and
Yeah.
So yeah, I like that whole mentorship idea. Right now, I would say the bandsaw, because it's so versatile. I do so many things on it. And then probably be the table saw.
Okay.
I do a lot with that. My next major purchase, I think, is going to be a drum sander. Because getting into this guitar work, I need to be able to sand.
Yeah.
Even though I've learned how to resaw on the bandsaw, I can cut down to maybe 3/16 of an inch or something like that, and fairly decent. But then you have to sand it or plane it. And I'd rather have a drum sander.
Get an even thickness.
I can get an even thickness and the proper thickness. It would be the mortise tendon thing. I bought it used from somebody, and I've never used it. I used it one time just to see how it worked. But I never really used it because there's other types of joinery that I'd rather use. And especially in cabinet work, I can't afford to spend the hours it would take to do mortise tendon work for some real fine furniture type. Nobody wants to pay for that kind of workmanship anymore.
Right.
In furniture, you know what I mean? And I could spend hours building beautiful furniture that would require a mortise tendon. Yeah, I would tell them to get a decent table saw, and you don't need to get a $5,000 saw stop or anything like that. They're a wonderful saw and all that for later. But get you a decent table saw.
Okay.
And if you don't know how to use it and you're not real comfortable with it, get somebody that can show you, because you will lose a finger in a heartbeat if you don't.
Right.
If you don't know what you're doing. And it's a dangerous tool. That and a good cutoff saw, good, like a DeWalt or something like that. Those two tools alone, you make a lot of stuff. You can make a lot of stuff. And then as the years go on, a drill motor, those three items would be the basic that you would need to start building something. Go back a few years ago when my granddaughters were little, I thought that'd be nice to make those jewelry boxes for them. So that was an ideal, and I enjoyed building those. On something that simple, I would do what I'm doing right here. This is just a quadrille pad. And I have a customer who wants me to build a bookcase for their kids' room. And they want it to look like they want this bookcase or to put toys and stuff on to look like a rocket ship.
Okay.
So, I just sat down here while you and I were talking a little while ago and started sketching out, something that I could, how would I do this? Once I get the idea and the size and everything, then I'll get a piece of drafting paper and I'll come in and I'll start drawing it.
Right.
That way I don't make any mistakes when I go to mill it. Yeah, I keep busy all the time. I'm getting phone calls and, somebody that wants something. I had a lady over in Benbrook that called me just out of the blue. And so I thought, well, as a courtesy, I'll go talk to her.
Yeah.
So I went over to Benbrook and talked to her. And I liked her right away. She was a pleasant lady, and she wanted a certain size coffee table and an end table that fit in a certain place. It had to be custom sized.
Yeah.
And so, and this was I don't know, maybe 4 to 6 weeks before the holidays.
Okay.
But her whole thing was it had to be done before Thanksgiving. And I said, well, okay, let me think about it. I did a real quick sketch while I was there, came back here. So I called her back and politely told her, I said, ma'am, I'm gonna pass because I am just loaded, And she said, oh, I'm really disappointed. I said, well, sorry it didn't work out for you. If you don't find anything else, I said, you can call me back in a couple of weeks. Maybe I'll find some space.
Yeah.
I didn't want to just completely close the door.
Yeah.
Sure enough, she called me a couple of weeks later, and she said, "Well, it don't have to be done by the holidays, but can you build this? Just the one table, And
Right.
I said, "Well, okay." So I did. Ended up building her the end table and a couple other little things in there, and they turned out really nice. And she just loves them. But I don't do that kind of work very often.
Okay.
It's only if a friend calls or something like that. But so I don't go out and advertise and promote myself. But I do enjoy rebuilding and stuff. It's a challenge. To rebuild something and try to, like the fire trucks.
Right.
What a challenge
Well, that goes
is.
back to the dresser that you started with.
Yeah. It does. It does. Goes all the way back to there.